Welcome, Mobile Flyers. I carry this little system wherever I go. It wasn't always like this though. I used to carry my blue 3DS XL, and before that, it was my original red model. I carry this little family of systems very close to me, both figuratively and literally, and things have never really changed over the years. There hasn't really been a good substitute to proper handheld experiences. I use this system pretty much every day. Now you might be thinking that phones and the Switch and laptops all might exist and can still play games portably, but I wouldn't really consider most of them to be good substitutes for what I would consider Nintendo's best handheld system. The year was 2010. The 3DS was just announced alongside a monstrous amount of future releases. Kingdom Hearts, Metal Gear Solid 3, Assassin's Creed, DJ Hero, Kid Icarus Uprising, and it wasn't just games announced. Movies such as Tangled, How to Train Your Dragon, Legends of the Guardians, all planned to be released in 3D. This sounded amazing! The fact you could bring these experiences on the go with a whole new dimension was beyond anything thought of at the time. And you have to remember, this was 2010. The iPhone 3G was the biggest piece of technology at the time, being the first smartphone with an app store. The 3DS was released a year later in 2011, with only half of what was promised. The store was coming soon, roughly half of the games announced in the 2010 presentation were cancelled. Not a single movie released, at least in North America, and it came in at $250. It's safe to say barely anybody bought this thing at launch. 6 months after release, Nintendo decided to cut the system's MSRP by $80, something never really seen in the video game market, let alone Nintendo. For those who bought it within that 6-month period, they were rewarded with what's called the Ambassador Program. Everybody was promised 10 NES games early and 10 GBA games that would never be put on the eShop. And would you look at that, the store is closing soon, so they really did hold their word to it. I got a 3DS shortly after the price cut for Christmas. I used this thing to death. So for Christmas of 2013, I decided to treat myself to a blue 3DS XL. This was the first system that I bought brand new with my own money. It felt amazing, and it's still in pretty good shape. Although I didn't put nearly as many hours into it and forgot to transfer my old save data, it's what I think of when 3DS comes to mind. A couple other versions came out as well, including a 2DS which looks like a slice of cake more than anything. And to wrap up the lineup, these 3 systems were released. They all have their own unique quirks to them, like swappable faceplates, premium build quality, and head tracking for the 3D display. I personally have a Galaxy new 3DS system. I bought it off a friend back in November 2021. It is by far the coolest piece in my collection, and the most important one to me. I use this thing quite literally every day. If you ever see me walking around at a game store or convention, I'm probably carrying my 3DS in hopes of finding a street pass in the wild. Pretty much anytime 2 3DS systems came in contact with each other wirelessly, it would send me over to a little plaza and exchange some basic information with the player, like what state you live in, what you were currently playing, as well as the ability to play games with their me. My favorite was always Puzzle Swap. You'd swap puzzle pieces around with people to complete boards. Once finished, it was a little 3D model you could view. There was so much character behind this simple program. Even the music would change depending on how many people were in your plaza. It gave a real sense of community that other systems haven't really done before. Like, I've met Switch owners before, but the few street passes I got at school sparked conversation, and now I've kinda talked to a new person in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have. It was one of those magical pre-installed apps on the system, like finding face filters for the first time. It was one of the many pre-installed apps on the 3DS. I'd never had a DSi growing up. Actually, it wasn't until recently that I bought one for myself, and would you believe it, most of the ideas they carried over to the 3DS. Even little things like the music and sound effects are scarily similar to the 3DS's home screen. I personally think the DSi is kinda neat, but nowadays, it feels gimmicky. But back then, having something as simple as a camera, voice recorder, and gaming device in a portable system was really cool. You could see a lot of resemblance from a quick glance as to what was carried over to Nintendo's newest handheld. Even all the digital DSi shop games were carried over to the new system, which is nice. Although the applications weren't better than the ones found on DSi, if anything I argue they're worse. They all have their own unique quirks to them, with my favorite being the camera app. To my knowledge, the ability to mess around with photos was pretty much removed, but they replaced it with the reason I still use my 3DS's camera a lot. Every photo and video on the rear camera is in 3D. This is mind-bogglingly cool, especially being able to see childhood photos on this thing. It doesn't feel like I'm there, but it definitely brings me back to the time these photos and videos were taken. In the end, the 3DS never really stuck to its original vision. A lot of stuff such as movies and even some games just never saw the light of day, at least in America. In Japan, they received a copy of Up for over $30, and honestly it just wasn't a great viewing experience compared to watching on your phone. But the idea of the system being a multimedia device never really left. For the most part, the ideas they had were just altered to better fit the system. Little things like the circle pad being changed so it no longer matched the system's color, to the games that were announced being reworked or completely cancelled. But in my opinion, they didn't really stand a chance against Nintendo Video. This was their biggest solution to not having movies on the system. Once a week, they would upload 4 new videos that you could watch in 3D. Some of them were little promotions for their games, and others were full-blown episodes of TV shows. This is beyond cool, especially since it was completely free and came with the system. Growing up with TV like this, having a couple new episodes a series each week to watch was amazing. After the 2DS was released, the 3D consistency wasn't entirely there, but the majority of it still was. I think everyone who grew up with this thing can immediately point towards Dinosaur Office, because let's be honest, it was the most iconic for the service. Although it is shut down today, the legacy still holds on within the eShop. All previously aired shows are there for your enjoyment with full 3D functionality, and some being downloadable. You'd be surprised with the amount of content there. Bravest Warriors initially aired on this thing, and most episodes are still there to watch for free. In fact, the 3DS came with hundreds of hours worth of free entertainment. Growing up with the 3DS, I never really spent a dime on software, so whenever I purchased anything, even if it held very little value to it, I was super happy. And this sort of mentality carried over towards game collecting. Like my copy of Samus Returns, it holds 50% more value than my copy of Sun at the moment. But to be honest, Pokemon Sun kinda carries more value to it for me, even though Samus Returns is worth 50% more monetary value. The 3DS was a prime example of this way of shopping because there was so much that you could do for free. It honestly makes the Switch look a little laughable at times. All 3DS systems came with the same digital games. They come with the Mii Creator, Face Raiders, AR cards, and Street Pass. The Mii Creator lets you create avatars for your games and such. Face Raider was a camera-based arcade shooter that could only work on 3DS. AR cards were kinda cool and then forgotten about. And you all know what Street Pass is by now. It was decent, and like I said, it came with Nintendo Video and such. But if you wanted more than what the system came with, then oh boy, do I have news for you. First of all, I'll mention demos. Yes, they aren't full games, but they've honestly given me a ton of value. Pretty much every game I'm looking to buy has an available demo, even Nintendo games. It's helped me make multiple purchases before, and it's a great opportunity for easy fun. They even added the DS Download Play that let you play pretty much any multiplayer game for free, as long as one person had a copy. Nintendo also put out their own free games on top of the demos. Swap Doodle was another instant classic, letting you draw on a 3DS and then sending your drawings to your friends over the internet and such. It was so cool and honestly added a ton of character to a system that felt like Nintendo's shot at a smartphone. Rusty's Real Deal Baseball was also pretty neat. It's a bit sad that this game will eventually be unplayable as it uses microtransactions to continue the story, but it was really neat. You'd basically haggle Rusty to lower his prices, but the prices you paid, that was real money. It was super neat and the games themselves were fun. There's more than just these games here, but if you were to pick up the best ones, these would be the best and the ones everyone would point to. I think the only one other people can mention is Badge Arcade. It was released later in the 3DS's life, but was an absolute blast. Every day you log in and play for badges. You could complete entire sets for free, but it gives you the option to buy more plays. It seems dumb, the fact you can collect little badges, and that's the only fun in the game. And yeah, It was the only fun in the game because the rest happened on your 3DS's home screen. Depending on the day, you can buy like $2 worth of plays and they'll throw in a free theme too. It was a really cool use of the 3DS's mobile-like home screen that I honestly wish they'd do again eventually. Speaking of themes, yes, the 3DS actually has them. I'm currently using the Sleepy Pikachu as my theme. All the folders change to little Pikachu faces and the bottom wallpaper is animated. I honestly love it. And what's also neat is that the 3DS's soundtrack changes depending on which wallpaper you have. Not all of them do this, but it's still fun nonetheless. The only downside to this is that most of them, well, cost money. Not all of them, but the majority of the good ones do. It sucks, but most of them cost $2, which is not bad at all. But if I can say anything, it's that this system right here was released in 2011 and has a phenomenal operating system. Even little things like having a track for every single thing you do. Yes, even the health and safety information has its own track. Funny thing is that it's not even a bad track. The thing sounds really nice. It's crazy to me that a system this old is superior in every way compared to what the Switch currently has. But where the Switch excels in, the 3DS lacks in. The only benefit to the Switch is that it's Nintendo's only system. It's a hybrid system, so you can play on the go and then dock it for some TV action. And if you wanted a dedicated handheld, they made the Switch Lite. This means Nintendo and other companies aren't developing for two different systems simultaneously. The 3DS was around during the age of the Wii U. Yeah, the thing flopped hard, but it meant there were two Nintendo systems to develop for. We got a lot more portable versions of franchises like Super Mario 3D Land and Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Some translated over better than others, but by far the two most popular and best functioning were JRPGs and puzzle games. Things like Tetris worked so well on a system because you had physical buttons to play the game with and a portable pick up and play format. And with the touchscreen, games like Puzzles and Dragons translated over perfectly. I personally love playing puzzle games on the system, as they're a ton of fun for short bursts of playtime. And the JRPGs, they flooded the system towards the end. Pokemon, Persona, Dragon Quest, Fire Emblem, there was a lot to play. And again, they translated over pretty well. You could pick up your save anywhere and put your console to sleep instead of finding a save point. Third-party output was a little slower, and honestly, I don't mind it as much. The first-party offerings were well worth it, and the good third-party games we did get were nothing short of phenomenal. That being said, this was one of the first handhelds to really embrace the indie market. You had the originals carried over from the DSi shop, as well as whole new experiences. Some of them received physical copies like Shovel Knight and Shantae, but for the most part, you're looking at spending a pretty penny if you want one. Luckily, I got Shovel Knight for like $13 a couple years back before the big boom, and I've gotta say, it is the same game as every other console. I prefer the 3DS controls with the pick up and play nature of the system, and the added 3D support makes this version of the game sorta unique to the other consoles. Actually, this wasn't the only 8-bit game to get 3D support. Nintendo re-released a couple of their older titles under the 3D Classics lineup. Games like Excitebike and Kirby's Adventure were remade from the ground up, given 3D support, and were sold at a cheap price tag. They improved quite a bit with these older versions, which is honestly awesome. Kid Icarus received new backgrounds, and Kirby had slowdown removed, making it the definitive version. The majority of the legacy titles didn't support 3D, but honestly it doesn't matter because of how many games were included on the eShop. Even though N64 games weren't natively supported, this system received a lot of remasters and revivals. Kid Icarus Uprising, Luigi's Mansion, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask 3D, Samus Returns, Star Fox 3D, even Fire Emblem was supposed to die on the system, but sold so well that they kept the franchise going. One could argue that there were too many re-releases, revivals, and remasters on the system, but honestly, I don't mind having a couple more games, and the fact that they were all portable now with new graphics and improved controls, all playable on this new type of screen, gave these games new life that was otherwise never really seen before. But the future's looking grim. The eShop is planned to close soon, and by the time you watch this video, it might be closed. All these updates, TV shows, demos, even full games are going to vanish. It's all up to the community to preserve these games like Pushmo from being completely erased. The future of digital games isn't fun, and sadly the prices for these physical games are also rising. Even systems are spiking past anything I thought I'd see, which must suck for system collectors. I have a feeling that services like crossplay between Wii U and 3DS on games like Smash will be difficult to operate past its closure. And games like Street Pass, sure, they rewarded you with play coins for carrying around your 3DS, but some quests require actual players, and so far, the only people I've been able to find were at conventions. To me, this is upsetting. Most of the 3DS's personality is slowly being erased, and not many people outside of the community seem to care. It's most of my childhood gaming on a ticking time bomb until it eventually vanishes. Thankfully though, the community behind the system is really talented. There are games like Face Raiders that don't translate well to anything but the 3DS, but even at that, they've been dedicated to preserving everything the system has to offer. Playing on an emulator is nowhere near as enjoyable as the actual game, but hey, I'll take something playable over a lost game any day of the week. Emulators are also a great way to capture footage nowadays. The community invented a hardware mod that lets you capture footage directly from the system. These chips are expensive to get done, but are the best way to get good looking and authentic 3DS footage. Not many people care for the system anymore, which breaks my heart to say, but it opens up an easier opportunity for your voice to be heard. Now, this will probably change in the coming years, as it is a very fun system to tinker with, both on the hardware and software side of things. But at the moment, I love hearing all these new ideas people have to keep the system thriving and preserved the way it deserves to be. I don't care what anybody says, the 3DS is still one of my favorite handheld devices to bring around today. It's still my main handheld, even more so than the Switch at times because of how compact and personal it feels to me. I don't know what the future of the system is going to look like in terms of the digital software and the system's official discontinuation, but to be honest, it's not too hard to deal with this time. Sure, the system itself is in its final breath. They stopped manufacturing the systems, games haven't been profitable for years, and people moved on to Nintendo's newest and greatest system. And besides, the only reason it was alive for so long was because of the whole Wii U mess. It wasn't Nintendo's best system financially, but no matter what Nintendo thinks of this system, it will never really die thanks to the amazing community keeping these memories alive. Thanks for watching.